Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. Negotiations are continuing on Parliament Hill, where the Liberals have failed to win support for the government's latest COVID-19 emergency aid bill. The Conservatives are withholding their support to push for a full resumption of Parliament, while the NDP refused to support a bill that included penalties for people committing fraud by claiming benefits. A compromise may involve introducing a separate bill for a one-time benefit for disabled people, which could be passed relatively quickly if at least one opposition party is prepared to support it. Amazon on Wednesday banned police use of its facial recognition technology for a year. It's the latest tech giant to step back from law enforcement use of systems that have faced criticism for incorrectly identifying people with darker skin. The Seattle-based company did not say why it took action now. Law enforcement agencies use facial recognition to identify suspects, but critics say it can be misused. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to hold his first rally of the COVID-19 era next Friday in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He made the announcement during a meeting with African-American supporters. The rally will take place on Juneteenth, the commemoration of the end of slavery in the U.S. Trump's rallies have been on hiatus since March 2nd because of COVID-19. A defense analyst with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute says it's too early to know what impact COVID-19 financial aid packages will have on the Canadian military. David Perry admits that if a government is looking to reduce all federal spending, the Department of National Defense plays a prime part because it spends the most money. He adds that part of the procurement issues that are being faced today, such as replacing the aging CF-18 fleet, is because of decisions made by previous governments. Well, masks will soon be mandatory on public transit in Toronto. The Ontario government is releasing safety guidelines to transit agencies across the province, recommending passengers wear masks and practice physical distancing to fight the spread of COVID-19. Transport Minister Carolyn Mulroney says the guidelines were designed in consultation with health and transit authorities. Migrant rights advocates say the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that laborers in Canada can no longer be treated like throwaway people. Asylum seekers working in long-term care homes in Quebec, temporary foreign workers on farms, and new immigrants toiling in meatpacking plants are all working in jobs that are now considered essential. Shelley Gilbert, who works on human trafficking cases in Windsor, Ontario, says the existing rules don't provide enough protections, including pathways to permanent residency. The United Steelworkers Union is applying to the federal government for conciliation to help reach a first collective agreement for federal prison chaplains. The 180 chaplains from a variety of faiths and spiritual practices want to secure better wages and working conditions. Chaplaincy services have been curtailed by the COVID-19 pandemic, forcing them to turn to government assistance programs. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg is facing allegations of racism by current and former staff. They say museum officials have not addressed complaints of racism made by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Some say the complaints were ignored or they were chastised as troublemakers. Museum President John Young says it will hire an external person to review and listen to the personal experiences of any current and former staff person. New Brunswick's Minister of Aboriginal Affairs says the province has a problem with systemic racism towards Indigenous people, and he is backing a call for an independent inquiry. Jake Stewart says after doing the job for 19 months, he feels he should tell the public about his view. Last week's shooting death of Chantel Moore, a 26-year-old Indigenous woman who was killed by police in Edmundston, has brought the issue to the forefront. Ottawa says it will now release details explaining how officials for Agriculture Canada decided to scratch grain dryers from the list of carbon tax exemptions for farmers. Earlier on Tuesday, Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau cited internal analysis used to determine the carbon tax applied to grain dryers, saying that it would cost an individual farm between $210 to $819 per year. Now, that is far less than what farmers say they're paying. The Agriculture Producers of Saskatchewan's Todd Lewis said this past winter saw some farmers fork over up to $10,000 in carbon tax for grain dryer operations. Well, Confederate monuments have re-emerged as a political flashpoint following the death of George Floyd, a Black man who died after a white Minneapolis police officer pressed his knee onto his neck for several minutes. Crowds of protesters are toppling the Civil War monuments as well as statues of other historical figures, like Christopher Columbus. The dismantling of statues comes at the same time NASCAR is moving to ban the Confederate flag from all of its events and properties. Brazil is grappling with both a coronavirus crisis and a political one that could result in its leader's removal. President Bolsonaro is defending himself against accusations that he repeatedly downplayed the COVID-19 outbreak, calling it a little flu, as well as allegations of abuse of power. Meanwhile, President Bolsonaro has lined his cabinet with military figures, some of whom have hinted at the possibility of military intervention to protect his grip on power, should that need come to pass. Ford is recalling about 2.5 million vehicles in the U.S., Canada, and elsewhere because of a nagging door latch problem and a brake fluid leak. The door latch recall covers more than 2.1 million cars, SUVs, and vans in the U.S. The latches can fail and cause the doors to open while the vehicles are moving. Ford is also recalling nearly 344,000 F-150 pickups in North America to fix a fluid leak from the brake master cylinder. British Columbia's premier says the province and its top doctor have approved a proposal for the NHL to make Vancouver a possible playoff hub city in Western Canada during COVID-19. Premier Horgan says a team would stay in a hotel and travel together to Rogers Arena for games using private transportation and be responsible for any COVID-19 testing and avoid interacting with the public during a 14-day isolation period. John Horgan says he has written to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to advance the initiative. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.